it's just gone 4:10 then. We're at Wednesday afternoon, and this is BayRadio International, where every other Wednesday, Cal generally has our friends in from Paythena Heredia, AlicanteLawyers.es. Now, I noticed, Antonio is here, by the way. Good afternoon. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
I noticed that the guys may be away. Now, I remember you mentioning this the last time you were in.
Yeah. I think
just come in a little bit closer on there, if you can.
Yeah. I think I got the dates wrong when I said it, but yes, they are in the States now.
Yes, there was Pedro with the big Hollywood sign behind him. You have to do that if you're in that part of the world, of course.
Well, yes, of course, I guess so. Well, I'm sure they're working, but I hope they're also enjoying a little bit.
Well, it is business, isn't it? It's not just it's just a jolly, as they say.
Yeah.
But to you, more than welcome in. We like having you in here, especially because we get to talk about property, which is kind of your specialist area. You do other stuff as well, I'm sure, but this is where you're...
Yes, that's definitely. Well, that's where I focus, right?
Yes, that's the way.
On my professional career, I've done other things, and even in Valencia Heredia, I not only focus on property, but it's definitely my main focus. And also, the part of the law that I like the most, so is the one that I spend the most time on.
And really, probably coming into its own over the last few years, because people moving and selling up and whatever.
Yeah.
So it all comes in. You're always brought into play, whatever they're doing, I suppose. Any transaction.
Yes, that's true. That's
right.
Well,
you should be from the start if they listen to their advice.
Ideally, yeah. In fact, well, talking about that, yesterday we've started the Renta campaign, right? So the Renta started on the 2nd of April. So if you are a resident in Spain, you should be scheduling your tax income appointment with your assessor or your solicitor to do it. Anyway, so we've started the campaign in Valencia Heredia as well. And I was yesterday doing these Renta appointments with clients. So yes, as we were saying, I not only do purchases and sales and such, but I also did these kinds of things. And I was telling the client, are you thinking of selling your house? It's like, yeah, well, I'm on the fence about it. I haven't decided. It's like, well, if you decide to do so, even before advertising it to, going to an agent and putting it on sale, you should definitely get an appointment with one of us. And then we look over the documentation for the property to try and spot any potential problem or trouble or things that we can fix before even you put the property on sale. And the reason to do so is a double reason. First, we could find something on the property that requires fixing. Normally, there's almost always there's something, but also we'll take off the time pressure, because once you put your property on the market and the property will go, because it will go normally rather quickly, then you have a time limit to sort it out. Anything that happens to the property, you have a time limit to sort it out before the property goes away. So that puts pressure on the seller, obviously on the lawyer as well, but particularly on the seller. Or even worse, you may putting a property on the market with a problem that you don't notice on the beginning, and maybe the buyer doesn't notice until it's either too late or is close to being too late, and then, it's a ticking bomb in which you have only a few days or a few hours to try and sort out that's something that maybe it's not that easy to sort out. Yes,
and you've got to argue whose fault it is and who's liable. And obviously, they've probably got a lawyer on the buyer's side as well, so they may spot something, and I guess before it's sold, it's up to the seller to fix it.
That's right, yes, but the problem of relying only on the buyer's seller is that the buyer's seller will obviously always on the side of the buyer. So they will be extremely cautious and maybe not too nice to the seller. So if the fix has an economic cost, has a money cost, then they will always say, well, how much is it? 2,000? Well, let's ask 3,000 or 3,500, just to be sure that we're getting it right. So you need somebody fighting on your side to spot it before and release that information to the buyer before it happens, so everything is clear and we're all clear on what the property is like, on what constitutes it, or if possible, to have it fixed before even the buyer notices, reducing obviously the overall cost of fixing any problem.
Now, we've set up nicely for a bit of breaking news here, because you're talking property transfer tax, and this is within the Valencia region, right?
That's right, yes. So in the Valencia region, the property transfer tax, the standard for resales, is 10%, and it has been, well, for quite some time, I would say, at least 10 years or so. But Carlos Mazón, our president, probably not the most popular guy at the moment.
Under fire. Yeah.
Yes, that's a nice way of saying it. But yes, Carlos Mazón has made one announcement, is in an official press release on the Generalitat Valenciana government website, in which he says he's going to lower this property transfer tax, the general standard case, from 10% to 9%. which is quite nice. It puts us a little bit closer to Murcia, who has 8% at the time, right? So yeah, I think is due.
Okay. It makes it harder to work out because you can work out 10% easily. And you have to do 9. Well, hang on. I'll take another 1% off.
That's the first thing. Yeah. That's the first thing I thought.
Do it in your
head.
head.
I have a client. I'm buying something for 150,000. Says, okay, 15,000, 10%. But how much is the 9%? From the top of my head, that's not that easy. Yeah, definitely.
No, I divide by 100 and times by 9. I think that's the way it works anyway, from what I remember. But then you've got to do that in your head.
Yeah,
that's right. There's no need nowadays. I remember at school they used to say, you need to learn this now because you won't have a calculator with you in future.
Yeah.
No, I've got way better than that. I've got my phone that can do everything I need to do. But they weren't to know, I suppose. So that's kind of something. That's the sort of thing you'd keep your eye on. I mean, you'd be alerted to that once it became law. So that's been announced, but not necessarily in play just yet.
That's right. So please be aware that if you are looking to complete in the next few weeks, you will not benefit from this promise because at this time it's just a promise, an official promise because he has made an official press release and he has full control of the tax, so he can make this decision, just on himself. He doesn't need the approval of the other parties, but however, it's not still in force. So I don't know how long it will take, but I hope for the summer it will be in force already.
Sure. Now, how does it work with you where you're based and where you sort of operate? Because presumably you generally in Alicante.
That's right, yes.
But like the guys, you come up to where we are, and we're in Javier, there's no secret about that, but you'd come up to the office here every week, or is it just whenever you need to?
Well, that's a very good question. So there's 20-something people working in Pellicer and Heredia, I think 22, 23 at the time. And we've got 5 offices, so Javier, Moraira, Alicante, Ciudad Quesada, and Ondón.
Which is Ondón.
Yeah, which is probably my favorite.
That's the original, right?
Yes, that's right. That's the original, yes, because one of the partners, Ignacio, is originally from Elda. So the closest place with foreigners there is Ondón. And back in the day, there was no other law firm in Ondón. Well, I think still there is no other law office in Ondón, although in Ondón de los Frailes, which is like 5-minute drive, there's one, and in Espe there's a couple. But back in the day, it was the Wild West.
Sure, they saw a market there. They saw a
that's right, the land to discover. Anyway, so I do rotate from office to office depending on the volume because I get asked per case, not per office. So yes, I come to Javier in the summer normally once per week. In winter normally once every 2 weeks or so. And in Ondón I go once per week for sure. And now on renta season I can go 2 or 3 times per week because I have a lot of appointments.
Yeah.
So yeah, it does change. One of my colleagues is going under surgery today. I hope he's doing well. Anyway, it's minor surgery. So he'll be out of commission for a couple of weeks. So I'm subbing for him on Quesada. Anyway, as you can see, we travel a lot. And obviously, there's other colleagues that also take other parts of the job.
And have some areas become you're having to visit more frequently because it's become so popular? I mean, Javier is taking off with buyers particularly.
That's right, yes.
And various nationalities moving in. I guess you're working with different people.
Yes, that's right. Not only British people, although it's still probably one of the strongest, although probably not in Javier. I think in Ondón, most of our clients are British. But that's because the core population that moved here in the late 90s, early 20s was British. So therefore, they're still our main client base. Also making it the oldest office. You get a lot of British residents that came back in the day and do your taxes every year with us. But here in Javier, the office is newer. It doesn't have that much time. I think 5 years or 6. So the makeshift of the clients or the nationalities of the clients is more diverse. We have a lot of Dutch.
Yes, you do.
We have a lot of Polish people buying Javier, which I like because they have a mentality that's similar to ours. At least I find it quite similar. So understanding is a little bit easier. And now, for some reason, we've got a few Norwegians.
Right, yes, I see the cars around because I guess the registration plate that's the N is Norway.
Yes, that's right.
Because I've just seen a few recently. I thought, no, what's that? Of course, Norway, Norwegian. Because they're not in the EU, are they? But they're within the Schengen area, the EEA, I think.
That's right. That's exactly right. That means that they're free to travel here as they please. They can get a QE, a European residence permit, so they don't have to go for a visa. So they get like the best of being part of the European Union without any caveats, the euro or any other caveats that maybe they don't like that much, but they're free to travel. So in fact, the clients that I had, we had the thinking of spending 5 months or 5 months and a half here in Spain, borderline resident status, and then spending spending the summers in Norway, which they've told me here is too hot, so they prefer to spend that time there.
I can understand that. Yes, I can go right along with that. But others outside of summer, they'd like to see some more daylight hours, I presume, depending on which part of Norway they're from. Up in the north, it's 4 hours light a day.
That's right.
If that.
Winter in Norway has to be rough anyway.
Yeah. Talking about property, and this was something when you came in, you started to mention, so we'll mention this today, and quite interesting about the utilities in a new build. So this is a new build, right? We're talking about maybe a block.
Yes. So when you buy a house, we've talked about this a few times, there's quite a difference between a resale and a new build, right? In a resale, the quality standard that you can expect is not as high as a new build because you are not buying a new project, right? It's a product that has been used. But also, when you buy a resale, will have, ideally, it should have running water and working electricity, right? Or maybe gas, a phone, a landline, less and less recently, but it used to be a landline as well. Yes, anyway, right. So the work normally consists on changing the ownership of the utility contracts, which, it's its own challenge, but obviously it's easier than when you buy a new build. So let's imagine for a second that you're buying a new build, okay? So most likely an apartment, which is the most common type of new build, although it can be a single-family house. But for the purpose of this argument, let's say an apartment. So it's a block, they're going to build 20 apartments, and you're buying one of them off-plan. So when the builder starts the work, it has the electricity and the pipes for the water up until the border of the plot, right? And they have 1 meter for the water and 1 meter for the electricity. Because it's an empty plot, so you cannot have individual meters for apartments that don't exist yet. Mm-hmm. So anyway, they build the thing, right? They have the whole thing, and every apartment is now wired and has all the pipes for the water. And open the tap and the water runs, and you plug something into the socket and it works. Okay, but still, there's 1 meter for the water and 1 meter for the electricity. This service is called building site utilities. So kind of say utilities in progress. There are temporary contracts that the developers can have for a block of apartments, for example, while they're still constructing. They have a few advantages. One of them is they are cheaper because you have only 1 meter for each, and others, right? But they are temporary. So once the apartments are finished, and normally at the time that the apartments are being sold, the utilities are disconnected. So that means that somebody that buys a property new build can expect for it to have no water and no electricity at the time of the purchase. So at the time that you go to the notary and pay for it and you receive the keys, no water. And the reason for that is because they've been disconnected from the building site, which is probably, if they're all finished, it will be disconnected anyway, and you are expected to reconnect with a new contract and install new meters for water and electricity. Well, when I say you, obviously I don't mean the client itself, themselves, yes, putting a meter in, but you need to contact the water company or the electricity company to have a technician go there and do it. That is important for several reasons. First reason is, as I said, if you buy something new and you want to stay the same weekend in which you are buying it and signing it at the notary, please arrange for a different accommodation because you won't have running water and electricity. So, you know what the challenge will be on that. And also because there's a cost on having these new altas, these new connections. It takes some time, it can take 1 or 2 weeks, depending, but at least, 5-6 days at least, normally. And it has a cost. In a few towns, it's on the few hundreds of euros. So maybe for 300-400 euros, you can get both of them connected. But for example, in Javia, there's an exception to that. So in Javia, there is a desalinization plant, right?
Yes,
so,
of course.
Yeah, so you used to take water from the sea and make it into drinkable water. And that is, very expensive. So the Javia Town Hall is repercuting or charging clients, people that are in new connections, brand new connections, right? Not a resale. A brand new connection to the water, they used to charge about 3,500 for every new connection. Oof. So, I know, right. Steep, isn't it? Yeah. But, you have to pay for the plant. It's not going to pay for itself, obviously.
It's an expensive business.
That's really expensive. Yeah. So, I'm not judging the amount. It's just warning, right? Okay, anyway. So, there used to be that. But this year, they've changed it, and they've lowered it to about 1,600, 1,700 per new water connection. Still a steep, obviously not as expensive, but still a steep, taking into account that other towns charge Denia can charge about 150 euros or so, but they don't have the plan, so there you go, right? Anyway, so this needs to be clear from the very beginning who is going to do this job, if the developer, your lawyer, you, so you get it connected as soon as possible after the purchase, particularly if you intend to visit after buying, and also who is going to pay for that, right?
Yeah.
If it's not set on the contract, then you can expect that it will come out of your own pocket. So that's one of the points that you should make clear when you're buying a new build: who is going to do the connections and who is going to pay for the connection, and how much is going to be, because you have to focus that expense. Obviously, if you're buying a new build and you're going to spend 300 or 350,000 euros on an apartment, then one extra 1,000 euros is not going to, you won't have to break the piggy bank to do it. But still, it would be nice to know exactly how much you're going to have to pay, right? So that's one issue. But the thing I wanted to talk about this is not exactly this, is what happens if no one changes the contract, but the utility for some reason remains connected. I had a case like this recently, a client of ours. He's bought a new build, but not an apartment. He bought a villa, right? So how does this work with a villa? It's only 1 meter for water and 1 meter for electricity, as a real property should be, a final property should be. So it looks like there's going to be no change, right? But there is a change. They have to change the meter from a working meter to a final meter. I know, mystical, technical water and electricity guys thing, right? Yeah. I'm not an expert on that, but I know. Anyway, so what has happened in this case is the client is buying a property that somebody, which the developer sells to him. The developer bought the villa and used it, for his family or something like that, since 2019 until now. And then my client buys it and takes possession of it now in March. And he was living there with working water and electricity, which is the utility name change, in theory. And then one day, 2 Iberdrola guys come in and disconnect the cable from the pole in the street.
Oh.
The full cable, they take it away. My client obviously was livid, calls me immediately. I have no idea what's going on, because we already arranged for the contract to be changed. And it turns out that he still had the building site utility going on, overdue. The previous owner had received several warnings, which they didn't disclose to us, obviously, or it could have been arranged. And then, as a result, my client had the electricity removed. So, in this case, obviously, we were able to sort it out rather quickly. We warned Iberdrola, they reconnected the cable, and we are sorting out the contract as we speak. So he was only disconnected for a few hours, but it could have been quite more serious. You can have the house permanently disconnected and have to arrange for a full reconnection, which will include a report by an electrician going into the house, reviewing the installation, making a report, and then you can get 2-3 weeks without electricity in a house. Well, it's not only the fridge contents that's going to spoil, also your mood. So, so anyway, the lesson for that is, as part of buying a property new build, you have to make sure also about the contracts, the utilities. They may seem minor, but I assure you, once you bought and you're living there, or you're using it, if you go there for a weekend expecting to stay, and then everything, the electricity is off and no one knows why, and the meter doesn't work, the automatic doesn't work, then yeah.
This is the sort of thing where it's just, there's so many little things that you know what to look for maybe sometimes, but people trying to do it on their own. You need an expert in, don't you, to look, and is it one of those things that people didn't know about? Has this happened before, where they've come up and said, what's this now? What have I got to pay for this?
Obviously, the client didn't even know what a building site utility contract is. Obviously, I wasn't expecting for him to know. In fact, again, it even passed below our standard, which is, the electricity company made the change and didn't say anything at all, which they should have disclosed at the time. It was their responsibility to tell us that it was a building site utility, because, for the art of magic, I'm not going to know. But what we managed to do in this case is sort it out. When the electricity was disconnected, we managed to get it reconnected in only a few hours, which I'm quite happy to say. So that, having a professional on your side, in that case, what didn't manage to prevent in this case the damage, but to reduce it as much as possible. So we were quick to react.
Yes, you got it sorted quickly.
Yes,
because it is one of those things. I mean, if people have bought before, they know that there's more to it than just the price you see advertised, because there's a lot about other extra expenses, and that's just an example of it. So to look out for those sort of things.
Right.
And it's also the legalities of things like that as well. Not just having the license to, occupation license, whatever you need.
Yeah,
but just even down to your connections.
Which the property had. So the property had everything. All the papers were correct. It had energy performance certificate. They were a town hall approval of the project. It was fully registered as finished. Everything was paid. No debts. So the house looked great. It was really, it was a 600,000 euro house. So it was expensive property. And then, on the minor thing, you have this problem. Again, quickly, it was sold out quickly, so there was no much trouble, but got me thinking, I have to improve my own system to avoid this from happening, even, getting into this point in the future.
Sure.
I have to be extra careful. Obviously, we'll learn, so we have to be extra careful because we managed to sort it out quickly this time, but next time maybe we're not so lucky. So I thought, all right, so even something that has not really much of an economic cost, because having the electricity reconnected in this case was free, but even if you need a report, maybe you are spending how much? 500, 600 euros? So it's not really that much. The problem is having the electricity disconnected for 2-3 weeks. That's the problem.
And you'd be able to discover that these warning letters had been sent presumably to the previous owner.
That's right, yes.
You know that in advance.
When I confronted the electricity company to tell them that they made a mistake, they said, no, the previous owner was duly informed. So again, honestly, what the owner should have done, the seller, I think he was a very old man, so probably that's part of the problem. But what he should have done is just release that information to us. That's no problem. We can sort it out. But miscommunication on having the warnings put on a drawer on the desk and forget about it. Well, that's what happens.
Yeah, and on similar lines, there are things like if there's a leak, who's liable? Because they're sort of liable for the water pipe up to the border or up to the property, and then from that connection onwards, it's down to you.
That's
I think that's how it works in the UK. Anyway.
Okay, yeah, that's also a very good point. In fact, talking about this is also another case from the Ondon area. I had one case like this last week. So in my case, I was representing the seller. Okay, so the seller was an elderly British couple, decided to move back to the UK. Perfect. So they put the house in the market. They find a buyer. They move back to the UK, and the house sat empty for about 4 or 5 months. While it was going due diligence, and the buyer needed some time to get the funds, stuff like that. Anyway, so 1 week before completion, the neighbor calls the agent and tells him, I think there's a leak. I see, a kind of how do you say, some water on the floor, close to the pool. It shouldn't be there. I think there's a leak. So in this case, we call the company. The companies in Spain don't automatically, not all of them automatically close the tap when they find a leak. And sometimes some water companies, they detect an unexpected water consumption, and they just close the tap. So if you are living there and you realize, that you go to the water company and then they have it sorted out. But in this case, in London, they do not. So no one was aware. So in this case, we found that the leak was inside of the property, and therefore the water company is not liable. Right. So my client had to pay. But if I were the buyer, I wouldn't like any surprises. So what I did is I took a meter reading, I went to the water company, got the latest invoice to an estimation of how much money was to be there spent. It was about 1,500 or so, and then I recommended the buyer's solicitor to keep the money to pay for the cost of the water. What can I do?
Absolutely. Well, as we've been used to saying in the last 10 years or so, there's an app for that. You can get an app that detects leaks in your system, and if you're away from the property for any length of time, it'll alert you if there's something wrong. It's using more water or any water at all if you're away.
Right, I didn't know that.
It'll alert you to that. Yeah, there's all sorts of things. Yeah,
as well as
your doorbells and stuff. Yeah, you can check your water usage, make sure no one's tapping into it or something, I suppose.
That's great.
Just wrapping up then with Antonio from BayRadio, who's in this week. So we've talked about a lot of property stuff, which is your area within the company generally. And this is an interesting one as well, that you brought up the subject of evictions.
True.
They may be managed in future. This was April the 3rd, which of course saw the end of the golden visa. We don't have to talk about that anymore.
Yes, no, we cannot.
So that did finish.
Yes, that's done. Mm-hmm. That's done and dusted. So the only people that can get a golden visa now is people that did the pre-application or the initial application for the golden visa. We have a few at the office, but not too many.
Oh, so
because people didn't want to take it too close to the deadline. So there's a few. But anyway, that's done. You cannot get a new application for a golden visa now. But again, please remember that there's other options. So you've got the non-lucrative, the work visa, aggregation, family grouping, the anchor visa. So there's other options that you can look for. It's not like you cannot move to Spain anymore. It's just not with that scheme. So you don't have to spend €500,000 if you don't want it.
Right.
Anyway.
But on that date, April 3rd, you were just saying this does it come into force now? It came in on that date.
Right, that's right. It was the law first /2025 coming to force on the 3rd of April. A lot of things from the legal world started that date. And one of the things that has started is kind of a law for efficiency in the legal process. So the idea is behind the law, all right? That's the idea, not what ended up happening. But the idea behind the law was to make the courts more efficient, because we have a problem in Spain. I know not only us, but us particularly, in which the courts are not fast enough. The cases take too long, so late justice is not justice at all. So all that stuff. So they decided, let's try and do it. In my very humble opinion, what they should have done is just pour some money into justice, get more courts, get more judges. If you got more people working on the problem and a little bit of review about the process, in theory things should go faster. But instead of that, what they've done is introduce in general court the character of the mediator, right? So if you have a dispute in life, you used to be able to go to kind of a referee, like an arbiter. Yes. for the law. Okay, yeah. That already existed. This kind of arbiter, what it does, arbitro, right? What it does is mediate, kind of, but also offers a ruling, right? Makes a decision. I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is mediation. Mediation doesn't offer a ruling. It does try to looks a little bit more like therapy. So what it does is you have two parties that are not in agreement. For example, the landlord and the tenant, right? The landlord wants to kick the tenant out, and the tenant doesn't want to leave. So then you have a problem there, which people having opposite desires. So they get in front of a mediator, and the mediator try to have them reach an agreement of some kind. So that was optional. It used to be mandatory for family conflicts. For example, when you get divorced and then who gets the kids, stuff like that. You can get mediation for that. But now it's going to be mandatory for a lot of civil processes. And therefore, if you want to evict somebody now, you'll have to go through mediation first. And the problem with that, it's not free.
No. Right.
You'll need to get a mediator. A mediator is a lawyer with a special qualification. So you cannot even use your own lawyer. So if you're a landlord, I have a case, obviously, I always have a case. So I have a case in which I have a client that wants to evict the tenant. In this case, well, I believe my client is right. What else can I believe? Because the tenant has exhausted the limit time for the contract. So the contract is up. It's not like the kicking out beforehand. It's like we're letting them know with time, like the contract is up. So please, pack your bags and leave, because the house is going to be used for other things. And the tenant has refused to do so, even though they should, right? So we have a conflict. So now my client, or me through my client, has to hire a third lawyer, not me and not the lawyer for the tenant, to mediate, which is going to go, I'm going to tell you already, nowhere. Not for nothing. I already tried to reach an agreement with the other party, and there's a conflict. We cannot reach an agreement. They have very opposite positions. So you have to do this first before going to court. So it's going to lengthen the process, and it's going to become more expensive. So one may think, Antonio, didn't you say that this was going to make the courts more efficient? Yes, more efficient for the courts. So that means that it will be a percentage of cases which will be dropped. They will not go to court because either the mediation will be successful. In some cases, they will. It's not really a stupid idea. The idea is not bad. Some cases, and others will just leave it. Obviously, not my case, because my clients are not going to let the tenants live there forever. But if you have a money claim, right, and it's really not that expensive, a couple €1,000, then now with the mediation expenses, it's going to be more costly to sue than not to sue. So probably you'll just let it go if it's going to be much of a nuisance.
Yes, it's like that. So, have I got I might be able to scrape the money together, but it's a whole to-do. Just go.
Is it
use that money to pay for a deposit somewhere else.
Is it really worth it?
Right.
So you'll have some people thinking it over if it's really worth the time and the expense to go through a court procedure. Again, big real cases will still go through, but there will be a decrease. So even if it's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of court cases decrease, still a win for the justice system, well, for the government, I think, but a loss for everybody else.
So the mediator can't, as you say, can't make a ruling, but they may be able to sort it out.
That's right.
Amicably as it can get.
Yes, I'm sure some cases, there's plenty, I've seen them. Frivolous lawsuits are a thing of every day, and there's a bunch of cases that will definitely benefit of having not bullheaded lawyer or really, dogged client and just, sitting down and talk it out. And then you may reach an agreement, which normally is better for everybody than going through a court proceeding.
Yeah.
But there's others that. And the problem with this law is it doesn't discriminate. It doesn't decide between types of cases or types of conflicts, or even if the solicitors, we can prove that we've already tried to reach an agreement and we couldn't, that's not enough. You still have to go through mediation. So it's too broad a stroke, I think, for it to be really useful.
So it would need to be, you'd have to do that if there was any sort of dispute, however...
Yeah. Well, not for every case, but for a lot of civil cases, not for criminal court. Right?
No, right.
So if you've been attacked or you've received a beating, then there's no mediation possible for that. But I'm talking about cases, particularly eviction. Eviction is the best case.
And presumably the landlord has to pay for those expenses.
Well, the parties have to pay for that, but in a case between landlord and tenant, the one that always ends up paying is the landlord,
Sure,
right? Because the tenant, normally when the tenant is involved in a court case, unless it's this case in which the contract is expired, the problem normally is because the tenant doesn't pay. So...
Yeah. All right. Well, we're out of time, but that's been fantastic. There's 3 great bits covered this afternoon. Always interesting, and there's always stuff we didn't even know or weren't aware of that you brought to light, and always things to look out for as well. But as we said earlier, just do get the experts in if you're looking at buying or selling. You may need one on either side.
Yes, definitely.
Okay. And we'll speak to you soon. I guess the guys will be back next time with Cal, but we'll put this up to watch back on our YouTube channel. And thanks ever so much. All right, all the best, and we'll catch up with you soon.
An absolute pleasure.